All right, thank you so much for coming back into the room. The way we have structured today is to have a certain flow to the conversation. So the next panel discussion is around industry engagement in education and training. And I think the conversations that we've had to date really set us up well to have that conversation. Can I just remind you to use the app as we have these facilitated panel conversations to have your questions come through on the iPad here. I'd love as many questions as you could come up with. I've got plenty on my screens, but I'm sure the wisdom of crowds is a lot better than anything that we as a Secretariat have come up with. So could I invite the members of the second panel to the stage, Dr. Carolyn Smith, Executive Director, Centre for Education and Training at the AI Group, Brendan Hopper, CIO for Technology of the Commonwealth Bank, Paul Robson, who's the CEO of MYOB, and Liam O'Brien, who I think undertook heroic efforts to get here as well, Assistant Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions. Please make them all very welcome. All right, and again, if I could ask you to go to the app, have a look at the questions that are coming through as we start to have this conversation about industry engagement with the education and training system. It's really crucial for equipping learners with the relevant skills they need. Carolyn, if I can start with you, the AI Group's the Australian survey partner for the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2025. And you know, it's pretty stark in terms of the way in which the demands and the skill sets are changing. 2/5 of workers will have their existing skill sets disrupted and transformed by 2030. So thinking about what Melinda was saying about the heavy lifting or the sort of training that industry is doing at the moment, how do you envisage the education and training system needing to adapt really to deliver these skills and really lean into the role of industry in supporting that adaptation?
Thanks, Ellen. I think it's worth reflecting that what that World Economic Forum research says about the types of skills that are in demand. So the fastest growing are in the tech space, so AI, machine learning, data warehousing, and the other thing that I think is really interesting is to look at the most sought after skills, and that's analytical thinking, leadership, agility, and you know those are the things that go to the judgment to be using artificial intelligence. They're also the types of skills that are about the adaptive capacity, so preparing people and workplaces for change. And that World Economic Forum research sort of aligns with other research that Australian Industry Group has done, which shows that digital skills at all ends of the spectrum, from basic skills and up, are strongly in demand. And I think what that sort of points to is that digital skills, we can't think about them just in a vertical way. We also need to think about the cross-cutting nature of digital skills. And so that sort of, that point about what the skill system needs to do to respond. So we need modern and flexible system architecture to adapt to that. And if we think about those specialist skills, so that's the higher order digital skills, that's things like, and it applies to VET and HE as well, that's needing more work integrated learning, seeing more uptake of earn while you learn models. We've talked a bit already about training packages and trying to ensure their responsiveness. They continue to be important, but there's also other models that we need to think about, ideally ones that can be accredited types of training that can be recognised. Those general digital skills, there's some interesting initiatives out there that's seeking to build those. So, for example, Victorian Government's got Digital Skills Program, and that's an initiative that gives 12 weeks of training in digital skills for mid-career workers, and also 12 weeks of a work placement, so to get that exposure. But one thing I also really wanted to highlight was the importance of those core skills. So that's, that's about the adaptive capacity, analytical thinking. A lot of that is covered in a lot of university courses. So that's a good thing. But I think in the vet space, and given the competency-based nature of that system, I guess I'd really point to the qualifications reform that's been underway over the last sort of couple of years, that for those occupations that are, or those skills that are not necessarily directly tied to a specific occupation, that there is a real need to sort of look at the training packages there and how that they can be more flexible. And then finally, I just want to talk about the underpinning foundation skills that come with that. I consider foundation skills literacy, language, numeracy, digital, and including AI literacy. They're really the absolutely fundamental learning to learn skills. And we can't forget about those. Australian Industry Group research shows that consistently over more than a decade, employers indicate it's a real issue. The most recent survey that we did said 9 out of 10 businesses found that to be a problem. It's that research is always sort of up around that level. So that's definitely something that we need to be considering. And there's programs there. The C program that got rebooted just over a year ago. But I think that's a quick overview of a range of the initiatives that are out there. But I think we really need to mobilise and get together to agree on digital skills as a priority, but we also need to stick to the system reform and progress the system reform that has been underway. But one thing I would just like to sort of conclude my initial comments is that there is a lot of focus on the system change that we've needed and the architecture, and that's great and it's important. There's a lot of investment, but there's also been an increasing disconnect from the workplace over the last decade. And it's really the close connection to the workplace that's going to drive the productivity uplift that we need. We've seen more of an institutional response over the last decade, so we're really keen to see that workplace focus return to the conversation.
Brendan, reflect for me, coming from such a large organisation, what does business expect from the education system? We've heard a lot about the what. Who should be doing all this?
Sure. So first of all, my perspective, I don't really care about who. I care about the people we can hire and the people we can work with. And I don't really care about what qualifications they have. So I look after engineering and innovation for CommBank. We've got about 9,000 engineers. We don't check to see if they've got degrees. It is one thing they can learn, having a degree, but they can learn those frameworks any other way.
Can you just move the mic just closer
Sure.
to you? Thank you.
I didn't have a degree until a couple of years ago. I'm entirely self-educated. We primarily look at what people can do, what they can achieve, and how they work with others. I think we've moved beyond a point where you can kind of do some study at the start of your career and it's going to last you for an entire career. It's very much about constantly learning. We care a lot more about how quickly people learn and how they work in teams and how they apply new ideas. That's probably the first one, is like how adaptive they are and how well they kind of swarm on problems and new knowledge and soak up information. And the second thing is probably like what kind of foundational frameworks they have mentally to be able to grasp that knowledge and information. And I think that maybe a couple of things. I think there's probably too much division in my mind in terms of like the industry or the education sector has gotten far too fine-grained on skills. The first 20 years of my career was in cybersecurity. I led cyber for CommBank. I never did a cybersecurity course. I could just do cybersecurity because I was good at computers. I understand how AI works. I could probably build AI. It's because I know how computers work. There's not that much distinction between these various categories when you get to kind of foundational topics. Then I think the things are kind of, these artificial divides that are introduced don't help. They actually make it harder as an employer to work out who can do what. And then I'd say, like, primarily, when we're interviewing people, when we're looking at entry-level careers, when we're looking at senior careers, we primarily care about what they've done, what they've built, who they've worked with, far less than what qualifications they have.
What do you think of that, Paul? Is that a position that a large employer can take, that they'll figure it out if you just attract the right people?
What do I think of that?
I'm still trying to figure out what I think about that.
All right. Would you like me to wait, Ella?
I think you're going to leave a lot of people behind if you think that.
Well, while we all reflect on that, what I wanted to do was give a different context and
Answer a different question.
yeah, a question that you didn't pose, but I'll give you a different answer to a different question that hopefully is relevant to everyone. So MYOB, I hope everyone knows who we are. We service and support over a million small and medium enterprises in the Australian and New Zealand economies. So these are small businesses that frankly don't look like anyone in this room in many cases. These are businesses that exist. There's about 2.6 million small and medium businesses in Australia. It represents half of the GDP of the country. And a quarter, 25% of the people that run a small and medium business in this country don't speak English at home and didn't have English as their first language. And in many cases, they're newly arrived to the country. And they've come from markets where they were running a business on a mobile device using technology like WhatsApp because, frankly, they never had access to either fast broadband internet or didn't have access to a computer or a PC. And as a champion and an advocate on the community of SMEs, one of the things that is really important for us is to highlight some of the challenges that an employee or a small business owner has in the context of their future skills. The person who is driving to your home to mow the lawn or to assist you with cleaning, or the person that is turning up at a job site as a subcontractor, as an electrician or a plumber, they frankly just do not have the time to attend professional development, to attend workshops, to be sent on training courses. They learn in a very different way. They learn either through osmosis, they learn from the job site, they learn from the people around them. YouTube. Or they have to seek learning out. They seek learning out in a way that is very different to an employee in a large corporation. So I run a large corporation supporting small businesses. I can send my team on training courses. I can invest a percentage of revenue on education. A plumber is not going to do that. A gig worker is not going to do that. And so for the SME person, when you think about the future of skills, it's on us as industry, it's on us as stakeholders, it's on government to be able to invest in delivering that education in a way, in a form, in a function, and in a place that those people have can take it on board. And in many cases, that could be through a podcast, it could be through voice, it could be while commuting, it could be watching it through social media. In many cases, it's delivered in a way that is not reading something, it's a different way of learning. So for us, we certainly believe that things like micro-credentialing are really important. Alignment between states and territories on some of the requirements and the regulations is really important because workforces are by their very nature transient. People move around the country, they move into different states. Having someone retrain or relearn regulation between two different states, as an example, is an impact to productivity. It's an impact to their ability to do their job. And in the context of digital, one of the things that we have found is if a small business invests in digital technology in their workforce, in the context of how we look at that, it's something as simple as using technology to do your financial statements, invoices and expenses, money in, money out, to help you do your GST, to help you register for GST, get a TFN. If you do that digitally, you save up to 17 hours a month. That's 3 full working days of productivity, or it's 17 hours that is generally spent on a weekend, on a Sunday night, as a small business owner, away from your family or away from running your business. And so I think there's a very strong alignment and correlation between education driving productivity and also between us artificially putting barriers in place by not thinking through the way that small and medium businesses need to access that education.
Rethinking
It's a slightly different answer to a question, but hopefully that was relevant.
Liam, I'm interested, I'll ask a question, it's up to you whether you answer it.
Let's talk about the Constitution. Go back to the previous
That's right.
conversation.
It's the vibe. I want to somehow circle back to this idea of the role of business in stepping in to drive the outcomes needed. What we've had here is a description of priorities for business and how they want skills to be offered, how they might engage with skills, upskilling and so forth. But what is the role of business, do you think, in delivering all this, rather than saying we want the mythical training sector to produce these outcomes?
Thank you. I think, well, I'm going to do you one better, Alan. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to pick up on the one that wasn't answered before in terms of response to Brendan, because I think there is value in defending qualifications. I think qualifications are fundamentally important to where we're at today, but indeed where we need to go to. And I think, notwithstanding, I agree almost entirely about the idea that we should hire for skill and provide those opportunities. We should recognise in particular, small business doesn't have the capacity that large businesses do to build those systems around workers. And qualifications provide huge opportunity for small, medium and even large businesses to verify skills. But to pick up on your point about...
But just on that, what sort of skills? Like, I did a journalism degree, it was a waste of time. I was taught how to cut quarter-inch tape, which is terrific if I ever want to work in a museum. You know, if you hire somebody with a commerce degree, it's just a way of gatekeeping, really. Do you actually need that in order to be a stockbroker or whatever it is that you want to be? So in other words, what sort of qualifications do you need?
Yeah. So having defended the system, I'll agree with Craig that I think the reform is important. But also I think the system architecture we've built and we're maturing is critical to that. To your point, no, we don't want workers signing up into qualifications that don't meet their aptitude, don't head them in a direction where they vocationally want to go. That's the beauty of this room. That's the beauty of Jobs and Skills Councils. It is about ensuring that qualifications are responsive to industry, not just employer, but worker needs as well. So whilst I don't want to talk necessarily about your own experience that occurred, I want to talk about the future experience, and I think the system architecture that we're building is going to help deliver on that. To the point about what should industry expect, I think, and I don't want to suggest for a minute that this is the common view, but I think often what does get put out there is that industry has an expectation that what VET or the higher ed system is going to produce is perfectly attuned workers that require no contextualised training, ready to fit in your machines. That's not what either system should be expected to deliver. I think what is acknowledged is we need to see more business investment in work-related training. If we're being honest about it, and I think the CEDA report picks it up quite nicely, but I agree that there's not enough data to actually talk about what business investment in work-related training is that's the thing that's gone missing in the last 2 decades. We haven't seen enough work-related training. So what should VET or higher ed be willing to do? Well, in the case of VET, it's a competency-based system. We should expect that workers are developing skills and refining them and being able to strategically use them in different settings. That doesn't displace the need for employers to provide contextualised training when workers start, or indeed when systems change and technology is introduced. There needs to be ongoing work-related training. I agree that too much of the current training is being used on compliance and the changing nature, in particular in, say, finance and tech. But actually what we've seen across the board, not just in this sector, but across all sectors, is a lack of investment in training. And so I think, we need to be clear that, when 80% of our economy is organised by private capital needs to step up and play its role in ensuring the skills that workers get from the public systems are then contextualised and relevant for business, but provide workers ongoing career opportunities. This should be an approach of lifelong learning. It shouldn't be, as was said earlier, that I get educated at the start of my career and let's just hope. Let's just hope I've picked a career or a qualification that enables me to succeed for the next 50, 60, God knows when I'll get to retire, 70 years down the track. I think what's amazing, I was at a round table last week, I think it was actually Barney who's just walked into the room, talked about what are the qualifications that are going to most prepare students for work in the 2050s and 60s. I did an arts degree and it turns out that's pretty good. Teaches you critical thinking.
Bloody
all of
expensive.
These things. Very
Bloody
expensive. Well, actually,
expensive.
very expensive now. We talk about job-ready graduates if we've got the time. But these are the things that we've got to be very careful about. When we change our system and we create these perverse incentives for workers or for future workers to walk away from qualifications that actually are well suited to the future, there's a real challenge not just for businesses but for the whole economy.
Brendan, I'm perversely going to ask you a question that's come from Peter Strong, who's had a long association with small business advocacy. He's saying small business owners out there are doing their own skills development, especially with embedding and upskilling on AI. Should they be left to do their own thing, and how should they be supported by the formal education and training system? Let's imagine I'm asking that question of you at a big bank. Should you be left to do your own thing, or to what extent do you want the formal education and training system to match you in that endeavour?
So I think all companies, to some extent, should be allowed to do their own thing, but I don't think they should have to go it alone. And maybe on my earlier point, I still believe in structured, long-form education and certifications and qualifications, particularly at 2 points in people's career. I think they give people a really good start.
Yeah.
And if people want to change careers, I think they give them a really good directional reset. In terms of how people pick up skills, though, like we've got top engineers, we've got distinguished engineers at CBA. They're the equivalent of a GM, but they just write software. They spend 3 hours a day on YouTube learning like how plumbers learn. The speed of delivery of the system needs to be that high.
Yeah.
And if I look at the tech companies, like the difference between a tech company in my mind and a conventional company is just, do they believe they have good ideas, or do they test everything? They test everything. And what that means is they don't just launch a product and say this is the new product. They launch 10 variations of it and they see what people actually use. I think that organisations of all sizes are going at themselves on skilling, because either the skilling system is too course-grained, it's too much of a time commitment, a 6-week course, a 6-month course. And then really relevant information is not being delivered quick enough. And I can tell you, like from our top engineers, the 2, 3, 4 hours a day they spend on YouTube learning things, those videos wouldn't have existed 8 weeks ago. So if you want to get under if you're talking about educating people in technology and getting under the cycle time of new information, it's probably an idea is out of date within 3 months.
Because I think you're right. Like, I don't think anyone's suggesting that we can build a skill system that allows workers to adapt at a 6-weekly time horizon, but we can give them the skills about how to learn that information. And I don't think we're doing that. I think we're not teaching workers about how to be innovative and how you seek information. I think too often this model becomes something that becomes a proprietary thing, and workers can't then validate that skill to say, I've come from CBA, I've learned all of these skills about how I learn that need to be validated. So don't disagree. I'm not for a minute suggesting that we should have this sort of, rigid sort of standstone sort of institution that doesn't adapt quickly. But workers should be able to build those skills, show that they're adaptive, and be able to have them certified so that they can move from CBA to the NAB. Otherwise, we end up with workers who don't have those career opportunities, which isn't good for the labour market. It's not good for workers, and I don't think it's good for businesses either in the long term.
Can I come back to where we started this conversation, Caroline, in terms of we're talking about the dynamism of a digital skill set, the dynamism of AI throughout, and then the kind of steady state of an educated person with foundational skills. Where is industry in all that? How much of that is on-the-job training, and what does that look like? To what extent is that something that industry needs to be delivering, if not devising?
To me, it comes back to that notion of adaptive capacity, which is the critical thinking, the analytical capabilities. It's what the World Economic Forum identified as the most in-demand area. And just on a personal note, I worked at Skills Australia about 15 years ago and ran the National Workforce Development Strategy for them as the project director. And key conclusion from that work was the importance of adaptive capacity after looking at scenarios of, for Australia out to 2025. So it's, regardless of, I think it's a pretty safe bet, pretty low risk for us to focus on that adaptive capacity.
Okay, coming back to the whole idea of small to medium enterprises, we're talking about a culture of, Paul, lifelong learning. The example was given before about, you get a $5,000 voucher in Singapore and you can go spend that anytime you want. We've got this funny economy, haven't we? We've got these big organisations and then we've got this preponderance of small to medium enterprises. And when you look at the construction sector, you go, geez, if you were starting again, you wouldn't build it like that. How do you build a culture of lifelong learning in SMEs? How do you do that?
Well, I think it's a really great question, Ellen. I think if I bridge both of the questions, I run a large organisation. I think AI is different right now to most other changes that we saw in the tech industry. I was here for the internet, I was here for mobile, I was here for cloud. AI is a step change that is maybe equal to the internet, if not more disruptive. And I think naturally, and I did do a commerce degree, and one of the things I remember from my economics unit, my commerce degree, is markets generally find efficiencies. And I think that big businesses will invest quickly on training on AI because they see it as an existential threat to a business model. So I think larger businesses will actually invest and they'll lean in. What I'm worried about in our role as advocating on behalf of our customers, which is the small and medium businesses, is how do they do it? And are we at risk at the country level of creating a widening gap between knowledge of an employee in a large business and the knowledge of a sole trader or knowledge of an employee in a smaller business, because they don't have the ability to invest capital in training activities or to get access to that content. So that is, I think, a very, it's a considerable area of focus that I think we should have as a country. On the SMEs, the context of continual learning, I think, is, by their very nature, small and medium businesses are ridiculously resilient. They just are, by their very nature. These are businesses that there is no linear path on what they necessarily founded to what they end up. And small business owners, entrepreneurs, have many, many careers and many changes and twists and turns in those journeys. And so by their nature, they're resilient. By their nature, they're willing to take a leap of faith. By their nature, they're willing to invest their own money in their own ideas and do their own things. So I think that they're ready, definitely open, definitely willing. I think it's on us to think about how we provide that context and provide that information. Otherwise, you run the risk of them seeking out the information through the tools, such as ChatGPT or Claude or pick your favourite LLM. I think I'm to come back to the early point. I am worried about the widening gap between large corporations and SMEs. I'm positive around the resilience. I'm positive around the desire on us to work out how to get the content to them.
That seems a question for you, Liam, because you come back to issues of fairness, right? We're not in Canberra for the weather in the middle of August. We're here to debate big ideas, and productivity is not a goal in and of itself. It is about the health of our society, how we want our living standards to be. We want everyone to participate in feeling they have a stake in the future prosperity of this country, that our kids and grandkids will do at least as well as we will do. That's what this debate is about, right? So when you're thinking, therefore, about that widening gap, that potential, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think, whether it's the widening gap in small and medium large businesses, whether it's the widening gap in tech generally, we know that, the future of AI is potentially going to see some of those gaps, get wider and wider, and we need to be very conscious of it. Productivity is fundamentally about fairness. It's about ensuring that those that deliver better quality services or more services are actually reaping the benefits of it as well. And that has not been the experience of workers in this country for the last generation. Productivity has risen and workers' wages have not kept up. A big part of ensuring future productivity is that social compact that was mentioned in the previous panel. If that's not there, then workers will become inherently, in fact they are inherently sceptical when employers sit there and talk to them about productivity, because productivity has been a code word for reducing inputs, maintaining outputs, which doesn't share wealth. It's seen people displaced.
But apply that thinking, right, to the SME owner. Do they see the benefits of that kind of investment on a Sunday night when they'd rather be watching Survivor or doing whatever else?
Well, I think they should. I think, one of the things that I think isn't necessarily, and I don't know we've got good data on it, but one of my own experiences has been, is that whether it's small or large businesses, we have become increasingly short-term focused. There is very few businesses that are out there looking at the long run. There's anecdotal evidence that actually privately held corporations invest more in skills than the publicly held one. And again, coming back to my own experience, someone who organised workers in the steel industry in both small businesses but large businesses, for 20 years, I saw businesses much more focused on what was happening next month, next year, rather than what the changes were 4 or 5 years down the track. And I think we're reaping the chooks have come home to roost on that, and we need to see a much greater investment, in particular in skills. I mean, skills, to the point that was asked of the Minister this morning, it is one session next week. In my view, it should be the whole 3 days. This is how we drive productivity. If we don't improve the knowledge and skills of workers in this country, then we will be left behind.
I say one more thing to that, if I can. I don't think that you can disconnect. Put everyone in the room. Put yourself in the mindset of a small business owner. If you've run your own business before, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not just about the ability for them to have the time to want to go and do the education on that Sunday night and not watch Survivor, whatever it may be. You have to connect also the impact of time. There's only so many hours in a week when you run your own business, and we as a country, we have to have in the same conversation the impact of regulation, over-regulation, paperwork. I've read an article. I think part of the AI group did this. Did some research. I think there's 36 forms to open a cafe in Tasmania.
31 in Brisbane.
31 in Brisbane.
I clicked through the Brisbane City Council. There are, and that won't get you a liquor licence.
Yeah.
That's a whole other process.
31 forms in Brisbane, and I think it's 20-something in Tasmania, a different number in Victoria, just to fill out forms to set up a business. And that doesn't stop. Every quarter, there's another form to fill out. There's regulation and red tape that is chewing up the available time that these people have that could be put into reskilling, educating and learning. So I think the two need to come together.
That's very astute. Brendan, here's a question from Dan Walsh, Mortgage and Finance Association of Australia. Larger organisations can often go through cycles of large redundancies, particularly in tech. How much of the learning that takes place in your organisations is, quote, to get the job done versus transferable future employability skills?
I think about that a lot. We try very hard to think many years ahead in terms of making sure that our workforce, particularly our tech workforce, which is my job, has the skills they're going to need in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. There definitely are big shifts in terms of role types. Like over the past 5 years and over the next 5 years, we're going to see something which is like tech will shrink down to just sort of 3 categories of roles, like probably 80% software engineers, people who do computer programming, probably 10% technology product managers, people who like understand tech quite deeply but also understand the business side of things, kind of like the combination of computing and MBA skill set. And then we're probably going to see about 10% of kind of like data and AI research as a specialization. We definitely, across, if you look at the Silicon Valley, most of the companies are structured that way. They get a CTO, they get a head of product, they grow down those 2 paths of the company, and then they add revenue and marketing, etc. We think a lot in terms of like letting our people know very far ahead of time, like 5 years out, 10 years out, what skills we think that they're gonna need, and then giving the opportunity not just to learn those skills through like either accredited or non-accredited training, but also learn them through applying them and rotating them through teams and putting them on the systems that are going to be future fit. And there's definitely a kind of standardization thing happening through tech at the moment, where probably 20 years ago, you had these deep specializations. You had like someone who spent their whole career on a particular kind of database, or you were an expert at one particular kind of technology. We're very much moving towards this generalist model. So we spend a lot of time on that and making sure that everyone gets multiple opportunities to go on that pathway. Now, like some people choose not to upskill and reskill and not to kind of pursue that constant learning mentality, and for some people the pressure's like it's too much for them to constantly learn. So that is one factor, but I think like that's probably one of the top 3 things I really spend a lot of my time thinking about and actually worrying about and making sure we get it right, and making sure that we can provide the best prediction as far out as possible about what skills are going to be relevant.
And does that change the mindset of the person? Because I'm thinking of myself. Aren't we all? We all exist in our own heads, don't we? Does that change the mindset of the employee who is kind of cleaving to the status quo if you're able to say, I've had to think about the future, I reckon these are the skills you're going to want to pick up? Does that shift people's willingness to upskill in a busy week, month with urgent priorities, right?
Massively, and don't quote me on these numbers, but I'd say that for about 80% of people it does.
Yeah.
I think about for 4 in 5 they go, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And I'll keep doing the legacy skill, I'll keep doing that while I start doing some work on the new skill, and I'll eventually transfer. And then I think just in general about 1 in 5 people are like resistant to it and you can't unpick them from the situation.
Okay. And what do you do with them?
Give them alternative pathways. Like, see, that they... So it's often a conversation about why don't you want to do it? And sometimes it's actually just because they don't enjoy it, it's too hard, they don't have the foundational knowledge. And if it's a foundational knowledge thing, it's trying to equip them with the foundational knowledge. If it's, I actually just don't want to go down that path, I don't want to be a software engineer, for example, then we try to find them a category of work to do that doesn't take them down that path. And it might be out of technology.
But having a guide to the future, having someone think about guiding you into the unknown future is a wonderful thing to happen at work. It's an investment in your people. It's a compliment. It's a terrific thing to have happen.
And it's it's a kind of the curse and the blessing of being a few years behind Silicon Valley in everything that happens in Australia, in that we can kind of look there and look to some other hotspots around the world and look at the models, and then anything they have in common seems to be a pretty safe bet that's going to happen. So while it doesn't necessarily mean that we're on that like leading/bleeding edge of technology development, it does mean we can prepare and look after our people in a better way.
There's a final question that's come through here from Emmanuel Goutalier. And I think this is a question we could have asked at any time, and we really need to get better at answering it. Maybe, Caroline, you can have a crack at it. We're in a catch-22 situation. Industry complains the education system doesn't deliver job-ready study. Education complains that industry are not hiring their graduates. Do we need a plan which would replicate the German Ausbildung work-study model that onboards more than 60% of students? Or any other way that you want to think about that, that sort of age-old question?
I won't respond specifically to that particular German model, but we're big fans at Australian Industry Group of work integrated learning, while you learn models.
Yeah.
So, industry values those kinds of approaches. I hosted a webinar a couple of months ago. It was about a degree apprenticeship in South Australia, and the university said that they sat down with the businesses and their first question was, what do you need? And from there, a great collaboration has ensued. So that kind of thinking that is, really about working together, collaborating. There are some fantastic examples out there, and I don't think that we should underestimate that. So the question is how we build and leverage. It's what our apprenticeship and traineeship system does. That's why vocational training is a really successful model. So
the education folks on one side of the table were saying to industry, what do you need? Did industry ever say that, ask the same question back the other way?
I mean, look, it was, in that particular project, it was a structured I guess, ongoing dialogue to work through the sort of the education and the employment aspects of that. It was a brand new initiative, so that was something really innovative that we're keen to see more of those.
Yeah, talking. All right, please thank the members of this panel so very much. I think that was a great conversation, and thank you so much for the questions you're sending through on the app. Much appreciated.